Oh, this episode. Man, if you are familiar with my work, you know exactly what I wanted from this show. You know of my desire to see the Empire become, the Empire. And this episode was the start of that. We see the beginning of one of the first transitions from Republic to Empire, a move that has now been given a name, Project Warmantle. But before we can get into that, I think we need to discuss the beginning of this episode, because I speculated on something in the last video, and it seems to be coming true. So, right off the bat, we see the Bad Batch in hyperspace after successfully escaping from Seleucami. We see that their ship is damaged, that they're low on rations, and that Tech is working on something. According to him, he's developing a device that is capable of reading or at least viewing the inhibitor chip inside of their heads. They are also made aware that Crosshair's actions a few episodes ago are all influenced by this chip. Last video, I talked about this. I said that one of the big plots of the season will be trying to help Crosshair remove his inhibitor. And there's really only one direction a plot like this can go, and that's toward Captain Rex, who is already in the process of discovering all that he can about these chips. Now, I could get into more, but I'd just be reiterating what I said in the last video. So if you'd like to know more of my thoughts on this, you could just go watch my discussion of episode 2 right here. But to keep going with this episode, fast forward a little bit, and we're back on Kamino. We see Crosshair, who is still undergoing a procedure on his inhibitor. And here is where I wrote one of my notes. If Crosshair has to undergo multiple operations to get his inhibitor functioning properly, this probably means that his actions and attitude over the last 3 episodes are most likely temporary. To better explain what I mean, it's kind of like Tylenol. When you get a headache, let's say, you take Tylenol and it temporarily stops the pain. I think what's happening to Crosshair is fairly similar. Crosshair is getting an operation done over time that allows for his chip to temporarily be enabled in its entirety to further the desires of the Empire. And I say this is the case because toward the end of this episode, we see Crosshair return to his room, the room he shared with all of the Bad Batch, and he expresses a faint emotional reaction to being without his old squad. From my understanding, the inhibitor chips disable emotion to ensure that the clones carry out a certain set of orders without hesitation. Because Crosshair is showing distress in his own edgy fashion, it seems to me that his inhibitor is really only functioning half the time and in short doses. I mean, at least that's what I'm getting from this situation, but we'll just have to see. Moving on, also on Kamino, like I mentioned at the start of the video, we finally get to see the first real transition from Republic to Empire. Under the name Project Warmantle, we see the first attempt at phasing out the clone army with one manned by actual people. We also get more confirmation as to why this is occurring. We already knew that the clone army was expensive and would be very expensive to maintain after the war. But we also see that by phasing out the clones, the Empire is bringing opportunity to its people. By providing them with a job, payment, etc., they stir loyalty in the system from its own citizens. It also allows the Empire to get away with whatever they want because those living in the Empire will end up so reliant on the system that they can't actually risk speaking out against it, or they'll just lose everything. Fun times, that is. But also on the topic of Warmantle, the Kaminoans are not happy. If the Empire phases out the clones, they also phase out the main source of income for the Kaminoans. And if that happens, we could be looking at a fairly similar situation as of what happened to the Geonosians. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, let me just say that there is a reason that there are no Geonosians in the original trilogy. Anyways, to counter this, in an attempt to subvert their fate, the Kaminoans are set to unveil certain projects they have been working on to appease the Empire. One of these is something that they have been working on for a while now, a replacement for the clones of Jango Fett. It is mentioned in this episode that the DNA used to clone Jango is deteriorating. And if I remember correctly, this was also a plot point brought up in Season 6 of the Clone Wars, I believe. I know for a fact that Fett's DNA deteriorating was talked about in the Clone Wars, I just don't remember what arc. But that being said, I have to mention it. Is that what Omega is supposed to be? Is Omega's donor the replacement for Jango? That also being said, is Omega's donor alive? She has to be, right? Because the problem with Jango was the fact that he died and the DNA used in cloning the men couldn't be replenished from the source. And if the Kaminoans want to create another army, there's no way that they would just allow for another possible suitor to just go off and die and put them in the same situation as Jango did. So this donor, whoever she might be, has to be alive. And you can mark my words, pin it, quote it, flame me when I'm wrong, but there is a very high chance that Omega will meet an adult version of herself sometime in the future. And finally, before we end today, because I really couldn't find anywhere else to mention this, Wrecker is experiencing headaches. These headaches are no doubt caused by his inhibitor, and it's got me thinking, what if, slowly, over time, these inhibitors start to take over each member of the Bad Batch and turn them against the group? It's already happened with Crosshair, and it seems to be happening with Wrecker. But I mean, that's just a thought. I have no evidence to support this, but it'll be interesting to see where this inhibitor plot all leads. If you have any questions or comments about this video, Star Wars, or its lore, feel free to leave them in the comment section down below, and I'll be sure to read each and every one of them. Thanks for watching, and remember well.